to another edition of Grindhouse Purgatory. Excuse me while I fire this up a bit. Need a little bit of refreshment this late in the afternoon here. Nothing hits the spot like after a hard day's work. Taking a hit off the old Duberino here. Well, I'm known for a lot of things, and one of the things I'm most known for is me bringing back 8mm porn to DVD. Admittedly, I'm not the first guy to do this. I discovered 8mm porn when I was hustling 8-track tapes back in the 70s, early 70s. Remember 8-track tapes, the shittiest fucking music format ever made? Well, anyway, while I was picking up an order of 8-track tapes, I saw a bunch of white boxes on a top shelf at the place I was going to from my mentor, Terrible Tom. And I said, all right, how much are you getting for these? Well, if you wanted to buy them in bulk, the black and white Stag films were $6 and the color ones were 10. And they all worked on this 8mm projector here, which I'm going to drag into view here. This is an old bulky one, it's a Revere. There is a ton of 8mm projectors out there. Perhaps later I'll take some little grabs of my little collection of 8mm projectors. But these were big and bulky and they were made for home use. But of course, you know, home porn didn't start out that way. It's sort of like ever since the dawn of time, man seems to have been fascinated with seeing other people screw. And it's been on cave walls and drawings and pyramids and all kinds of shit like that. But the first format that came out for home use was the 16mm one. Of course, you know, it's double the size of an 8mm film. It was silent. If you notice, I don't know if we can get close in here, but the perforations on each side, they were silent. And they ran about maybe 5-10 minutes. Of course, with, you know, technology advancing and things like that, 8mm was the home movie format, and all of your pornographers going back, I'd say, to like maybe the 40s, started coming out with 8mm films. Some guys were a little bit smarter than others. Like in the 50s, there was a guy named Joe Bonica. Joe is famous for shooting atom bomb footage out in Nevada, but also come up with a unique concept called the Movie of the Month. For an undisclosed fee, and I don't really know what the fee was, you got this wonderful 50-foot loop, which ran about maybe 3-4 minutes, with a woman like this on it. There was no sex, just some nudity, pasties, titillation, whatever. But yeah, you joined the club, and once a month you got the film that went in this box. Now, all this nudie stuff was pretty much tame and was out in the open in the 70s. Of course, the 8mm film spawned the advent of the peep show by the Papa of the Peeps, Martin Hodas, who was approached by a guy who had a bunch of broken Nickelodeons and said, you know, a smart guy like you could figure out something to do with these. So what he did was he got all these nudie loops and split beaver loops from California, went up and down 42nd Street to the adult stores, pretty much, you know, talked his way into them and put these machines in. Well, the quarters kept on rolling in and rolling in. Huge amounts of quarters kept rolling in. Of course, that attracted the attention of the mob. So one day, Marty found all his machines out on the curb and the mob's machines were in. So Marty had to cut a deal. And in cutting the deal, you know, he made peace. Of course, he paid a tribute, which everybody back then did. But it opened it up to other cities. You know, now I reside in Ohio, and I ran into people that used to work for Marty that said part of their deal was they drive to Ohio to pick up money. At one point, the peep shows were supplying Chemical Bank in New York with all their quarters. They would roll in sometimes $10,000, $15,000 worth of quarters a week. And they would wind up in there. As for the films themselves, most of them were, you know, shot in New York City, and of course the X-rated, the hardcore stuff was undercover. It wasn't out until around mid-70s after Deep Throat popped up. But you could only get the porn in nondescript boxes with a little, lettering logo on the side of what they could be. This was your standard 200-foot one. It said color with a number written on it. And of course, when you open the damn thing up, there was a picture in it that would basically, hopefully, describe the action in the film. I mean, this one, God, I never knew what you could do with a cucumber and 3 ears of corn. But that's beside the point. We don't, This would be your 8mm film. Don't let the color reel fool you. Usually they were on gray reels, but this is your standard 200-foot 8mm film, which stayed in white boxes probably until, I don't know, it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to track stuff down, but the boxes changed. I'd say around the mid-70s they started putting little color things on them, but of course companies came out like Danish Films International, and again, whatever the thing would be, the number in the catalog would be on the side of the box of the film. There was a ton of these that came out. We have the M series, and of course you see the $50 price tag on it, and that's what they tried to get for the stuff. Again, there's a stencil on here of what would be in the catalog. Here's one that promised just about everything, and it's pretty wild that you see, I'll read this off because I don't know if you can see what is there, but of course John Holmes is prominently featured in the credits here, as well as Animals, Gay, S&M, B&D, whatever. Sometimes you never knew what you were getting. That was a specialty thing, but other labels, were Eros Films, this weird stuff, B&D stuff from California, Oz Films, and another nondescript white box with practically nothing on it. And then you had Moon Films, were like Paris imports, and this one went for a whopping $75. Of course, the closest this thing has ever been to Paris was next to an order of French fries. Then you had Climax Films, where they actually glue a picture in the middle here. Then other things, came to pass, like Lassie Brown was a famous European pornographer that had his own line, and I'm just showing you this because it's got a clean box. In 1965, there was a switch in formats. Somebody came up with what they thought would be better, Super 8. Now, Super 8 was great for the home movie maker because the perforations were more widely spaced than the regular 8mm films, which gave you a better viewing type of thing. But the big problem with Super 8 was needed a specific projector, sort of like Beta VHS, HD versus Blu-ray. You had two formats in which one of them sucked, and in my opinion the Super 8 sucked because there was no reason to put out Super 8 films. But here you can see the Super 8 has a bigger take-up hole, and if you can get in closer here, which I doubt we can because we're playing with home movies here, the sprocket holes were like pinholes almost. Thing was, these films were not interchangeable with projectors. Regular 8 ran on a regular 8, Super 8 ran on a Super 8. I have yet to actually ever find a freestanding Super 8 projector. Most of them were combos where you switch the lever and they'd play both, but in my experience, usually those things would just start to eat up the films after a while. They were cheaply made unless you wanted to go a couple $100 for them, I guess. Again, I've never actually had a Super 8 projector that worked properly, so I can't say whether there was ever a fucking good one out there. Which is rough because, when you find some of these films, you want to check them out. Now, my own thing was, I had been, hustling loops when I was a teenager. I'd go to the standard places, VFW halls, motor vehicle inspection stations. Sometimes the local police would buy them off me. This was a big crime back in the day. It wasn't a gray area, it was a crime until things loosened up in the mid-70s. You could actually do jail time for selling these damn things. So that's, how I started in the business, and it always sort of like typecast me, for lack of better words. But it always made money, always paid the bills. Now, of course, in my smut peddling days, of course, once VHS and home video came on the scene, nobody gave a fuck about these films. These films were basically dumped in a bin in front of your bigger emporiums like the Harem and Showworld and shit like that, and blown out on the cheap. Thing is, your commercially produced porn could not duplicate the back alley ambiance of these Stag films. And the Stag films were the training ground for a lot of New York City and West Coast based actors and actresses, which would transcend the 8mm stuff and go into like 35mm features. Jamie Gillis, John Holmes, Vanessa Del Rey, Ginger Lynn was in a couple loops, I believe. I actually had one with her. Sika was in a lot of Swedish erotica stuff. Sharon Mitchell, Harry Reams, directors like Sean Costello and Carter Stevens made loops. So the loops were like basically a brutal. Some people said it was a brutal training ground, and sometimes I guess it was. There was all kinds of kink loops filmed. The infamous Linda Lovelace dog film was shot in Bob Wolf's studio. I think it was off 14th Street somewhere. Carter Stevens had told me he had met Jamie Gillis there because he had answered an ad for, to be in a film. There was no internet back then, so, performers were pretty much on the DL. I mean, Jamie Gillis could actually act. A lot of those guys could act. Harry Reams could act. Vanessa could act. But, they did this to pay the bills and hopefully, try to find work in other venues. My whole deal came about with Something Weird Video. I had met Mike in an early Chiller Theater convention, and we became friends. But when he started putting out his VHS tapes, I had a store, and his wholesale was my retail. So we were kicking things around, and he said, I'll tell you what, why don't you trade me something for my tapes? And I said, well, what are you looking for? He goes, Stag films. Well, as luck would have it, I still had a batch that I hadn't sold from the old days stashed in my mother's basement. And I put up a sign in my video store saying that I would trade, one VHS porn tape for a couple loops. So I probably had 100 loops in my stash, and people kept bringing these things in. So sent like 300 loops off to Mike, and then he sent me, a bunch of videotapes. And then I said, are you doing anything to introduce these loops? And he said, no, we got Bucky Beaver. So I, of course, indulged in a little weed, drank some vino. I was living up my place in Lake Patcon, so threw on a trench coat, threw on the hat, threw on the dark glasses, and created the 42nd Street Pete persona. Well, Mike liked it. He encouraged me to write reviews on these things, so basically I got about 20 VHS tapes, which is about 40 hours of 8mm porn. Sat through them, wrote up liners, did my thing, and then he had nothing else for me. But I got a call from After Hours Cinema, Alternative Cinema, from my friend Mike Razzo, who asked me if I wanted to do liner notes for these 16mm features he picked up from Nick Phillips. So I was like, do I really want to stay in this porn thing? So I said, send me this stuff and let me look at it. So I looked at it and realized that I had seen this stuff back in the day in New York. And Nick's stuff was pretty cool. I can do more on that later, and I will. But that led to a little, job writing liner notes, for After Hours Cinema. So I got this bug up my ass. After I had been divorced for a while, and my ex-wife called me up and she goes, there is a wooden crate in the crawl space here, and I think it belongs to you. So I go down and I pull it out, and lo and behold, it's packed with Stag films. And I don't mean just any Stag films. I mean all the good shit. John Holmes, Linda Lovelace, Candy Samples, Ushi, Samantha Fox, all good shit. So I'm thinking this over, and I says, all right, I wouldn't be the first guy to do this, because Something Weird obviously just put out like 200-something fucking volumes. Other companies have put out stuff, but I noticed they were just put out. There was no backstory to this stuff, no history, no anything. I mean, let's face it, this stuff is the great-great-grandfather of VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, streaming, whatever. So I went into Mike's office and said, I would really like to do this, but I want to do it a different way. I want to do it with, a little history behind it, a little backstory, and, some humor. So he said, everybody talks, nobody puts up their money. So I threw an undisclosed amount of cash on his desk and said, match it and we're in. So that led to my first release. I called it 8mm Madness.